Today I'm launching my podcast where I interview leaders in B2B sales so you can learn how to become a better salesperson, entrepreneur, and leader. On this episode of the podcast, I'm chatting with Abby Leibowitz, the CEO of Call Experts, which is an award-winning contact center in Charleston, South Carolina. Call Experts offers outsourced customer service and customer solutions of all types. And in 2014, Abby actually grew her company's revenue from $4.4 million to $8.4 million in 2017, which is a 90% increase in just 3 years. So I was very excited to have her on the show. Today, Abby talked about the importance of personalization in cold email outreach, why you should always take responsibility for everything, how her cultural background has impacted her work ethic, how she enables her team to be successful, and the importance of education. I was especially excited to record this episode because Abby and I were both raised in Jewish homes. So in the podcast, we discussed a few ways our Jewish upbringing has impacted us personally and professionally. And that's actually how I got her on the show. I mentioned that in my email. You'll hear about that in a bit. And before we jump in, if you want to learn how to cold email yourself so you can get more clients, close more business, I actually have a cold email lead generation training document that you can grab in the description down below. It will show you everything you need to know to generate leads, find the right people, find their emails, validate them, even if most cold email tools could not find their email, and you can even validate them if validation tools aren't working. It's totally free. You can grab it down below. That being said, let's jump into the interview. What made you want to hop on this call? How did I get in touch with you? I'll hear from your perspective.
I do get a lot of spam emails, so it is unusual that I responded to this one. We happen to be looking for what you were saying anyway. You were talking about lead generation. Not that yours was a spam email, but I assume most are. I assume all are, right? So I saw your email, and we are interested in looking for that anyway, like looking at our sales stuff. And then I said, okay, we're interested. We'll talk about it. And then you happened to follow up with me, but then I was busy anyway, right? And then you happened to follow up with me, and you had looked at my LinkedIn profile, I think, and found a connection to University of Haifa, and you were smart to put that in. And it was right around the time that I've been telling my sales team, like, get to know the person personally, make a connection, and you did it. And I thought, this is going to make me respond. It worked on me. They need to do this, right? So it was a great example. So I actually even more so responded to prove to my sales team that works. Okay. And be able to share the success story for you, for someone else, like seeking a response from someone. So you said Haifa, you made the connection. And then from there, of course, it naturally turned into, hey, let's connect and help each other because we're Jewish, which always happens.
Yeah, exactly. No, I saw the University of Haifa, and I spent some time there, and then I saw your last name, Leibowitz. I was like, I think it's safe to assume. So I actually was sitting next to my grandma at the time, classic Jewish grandma. And when you responded back, I was like, Grandma, look, I got her attention. She thought it was awesome.
And did she say, I tell you, it works every time?
Not quite, but I'm glad that you like the personalization. It's definitely something that I think every sales team can learn from, because like you said, everything is always spam nowadays. And so adding a personal touch definitely sets you apart for sure.
Yes, we're competing for attention, limited resources. So anything you can do that's different and trigger an emotion, it really works. So.
Yeah, exactly. And even earlier on the call, I was talking to you and you're like, sorry, I can even see in your glasses right now, you're looking at something else too. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm multitasking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. So I think that the topic for what we want to discuss today is sort of an interesting angle. Typically, I want to discuss how sales and business growth from a leader's perspective. But since we have a Jewish connection, we thought it'd be cool to kind of discuss it from that angle. And so, one of the biggest things that I like about Judaism is the emphasis on personal responsibility, owning everything and taking responsibility for everything in your own life and for your family. And I think it comes down to the victor versus victim mindset, right? Like, victors are the ones who take responsibility, and victims blame other people and that kind of thing. So the first question for you would be, how has Judaism's focus, in your experience in Judaism, how has Judaism's focus on ownership and personal responsibility impacted your leadership style, how you run your company, how you try and train your employees, and that kind of thing?
I think first we should probably give the disclaimer that like this is by no means only Jewish values that think these things.
Right.
It's just like from my personal experience, the way I was brought up has helped me in a lot of these areas and just dictated, what my values are, my influence, my growth. And I mean, personal responsibility, I think, is a huge one, right? Like helping and making sure that your team is trained to do and have confidence in what they're doing. And also taking ownership. I know just actually last week I was thinking about something, when things go wrong in the company or I'm not so happy with them, but this concept of blame, like who do you blame? And a lot of people might say like, oh, I'm annoyed at this employee. They didn't fulfill their responsibilities. They didn't do something like that. And I'll even have like colleagues or friends I'll run things by and say like, oh, I'm frustrated with not a lot of details. This person didn't do that. And they'll say like, which is nice. And shouldn't maybe, I don't hope this doesn't sound like a brag. They'll say like, you're really good to them. You pay them well. They should be doing that. Why can't you do more? And I actually instead will be like, always back to blaming myself. Right. And there's pros and cons to this. People always say like, it's okay, don't blame. But I actually say like, no, it's always my fault. Right. If my company's not doing well, I feel like it's always my fault. And I do blame myself. Something's missing. Either I didn't get the right person in the seat, or I didn't train them well, or I didn't give the tools. And I do think that there's points where that can go too far and not always be a positive, but I also think that it's helpful because it also puts the onus on you. And with that becomes the responsibility and knowledge that you can make the change yourself too. So you're not dependent upon someone else either. So, I mean, I really believe in personal responsibility. For me, like that it is all my fault because I have control and it's all a choice, right? I think we even had that email chain too. I mentioned like, hey, I'm really busy. Sorry, I might not be able to respond in time. And then I felt so guilty. Another theme, they're just popping up, that I put that on you. That's not your fault that I'm busy. Like I shouldn't have complained to you. Like I got myself into this. I took on all these things. It was all a choice, right? It's a choice to, run a business, have a job. Yeah.
Interesting. I really love that. And I think that's a mindset that a lot of people could benefit from, taking responsibility. Like, even if you're at a red light, you get hit by a car, it's like, you shouldn't have been at the red light. You should have been somewhere else.
Well,
Maybe that's okay to blame. But no, but the beauty of that is when everything is your fault, you have the ability to fix it and change and improve. And when it's out of your control and someone else's fault, you're going to have the same result over and over and over again. But at the same time, like you said, it can go too far. So how do you balance that? Because if you always are ragging on yourself for everything, it's going to be hard to be happy. So how do you balance, number one, making sure you're taking responsibility, but also not going too far and I don't know if I don't think kvetching is the right word to use here, but being too hard on yourself. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think that I think there's a balance with that. And then there's the balance also like in the employer-employee relationship too, right? Like you want to do everything you can for them, but then there is a point, right? Because there's boundaries too, and a point where they need to take responsibility for themselves. I think that ties back to your question too, like the concept of personal responsibility for them too and encouraging it in them, right? Because they need to also step up so that they will be happy and fulfilled as well, right? So there is a point. I think the important part is just that the first question needs to be, what did I do to contribute and get myself into this situation? It always needs to be the first question to look within. And it could be, no, I was clear. I gave warnings. I gave examples. I got to this point. You should also know your process. And then once you run through that list, you say, okay, now it's time to ask them to step up. And then that's when you also personally, to answer your question, can say like, okay, it really isn't all complete. Like I did what I could. I contributed to this mess, but
yeah, that makes sense.
Right, like there's a point.
That's something that I've been thinking about too, because when something goes wrong, it's like how far do I go with it's my fault, before you're like, okay, you know what, this person really screwed this up. Like I did X, Y, Z, I followed the process, and it still didn't go right. So I think if everyone has that mindset of it's my fault, then it will work. But if one person has it's my fault always, and someone else it's always your fault, then it can be like a negative feedback loop, because then they're just going to keep blaming it on you because they know that you're going to take the responsibility anyway, which can be bad.
An unhealthy relationship.
Yeah, bingo. So how do you avoid those when you're hiring? What do you look for in your employees to make sure that they take responsibility for themselves?
So it sounds sort of like cliche by this point, although I really enjoy this concept lately. It's a culture match, I think too. Like it's And then I know it's going to end up tying back into our conversation, right? Because it's about like Jewish culture and how these things and this way of being and these rules and mannerisms also influence and contribute to successful business relationships and leadership, right? But it's looking for people who share similar values, right? So you look at things the same way, and values that happen to lead to better quality of life, personal responsibility, growth, and success, right? Like
Hmm.
that's the outcome, positive, good things. So you do look for a culture match. I think that people underestimate how much time they spend at work. And instead of looking for, like some people, like it's a debate. Is it, do you hire based on will or do you hire based on skill? Which one can you teach, right? Like, is it a will issue, skill issue? I always will take a skill, like if there's a skill issue, I can address that. I can't always address a will issue, right? Which is a bad culture match. So you look for like, who do I actually want to enjoy like spending my time with? Who do I want to hang around and be with? And like, because you're at work so much, right? Like if you do the
Yeah.
math, little different now with COVID. Some people might be working even more in a way on their computers, but you really spend your life with people you work with a lot of times, especially in a long career. So, I mean, you do need to look for a good culture match and you can learn together. And I think, being inquisitive and innovative and things like that and taking responsibility. And I know at one point I actually said to the recruiting team, can we just ask people, like, are you an optimist? Do you take responsibility and see how you contributed to a problem? And are you nice? And can that just be enough? Right. And then like basic reading and writing. But if everyone fit into that, so many of our problems would go away. The
I think
misunderstandings, stuff like that.
in an interview that I watched with that you were doing, and I forget actually which one it was exactly, but you were talking about how I think it was one of the first ones that you did. It was a few years ago, or with the specific. You did two with this guy, Dig South, I think it's called. I forget
Yeah.
the name of the guy. Yeah. So you were talking to him about how in the South, you were sitting in a cafe, I think, and you're talking about how in the South, there's like the nice, friendly accent, and it's really important. So how, I mean, I think I was gonna say you're looking for people who are nice and willing to be nice and friendly above all, because it
Right.
sounds like, and with what you're doing, that's one of the most important things is just being willing to improve and be friendly and good with people, especially because not only you're with people all day and the team has to be happy, but they're also, I mean, you're doing customer support a lot. So that's a big part
And
of it
just
too.
like people, like interaction with people, right? That's what you do too, like sales, customer service, it's interaction. Some people will say everything is sales. We're always selling something, like
I
in
agree.
some way or another, right? So you have to want to connect with people genuinely. And I
Hmm.
think that just leads to a genuine attitude about anything is going to lead to greater success as
Right.
well.
Cool. Well, you were talking about culture, and that's another thing I want to talk about is like the Jewish culture, because I think a lot of people who aren't, and your caveat at the beginning was good. These aren't exclusive to Judaism, but it is a
Right.
big part of it. And I think a lot of people who don't understand that there's a whole Jewish culture that's aside from the religious aspect. It's hard. They're like, "What do you mean you don't like? You're an atheist or you're agnostic, but you're still Jewish." Like they don't connect the dots. I think, but there's
And
a
you refer
whole
them to Seinfeld, right?
yeah. Oh, you like Seinfeld too? Wonderful. No, but exactly. There's a whole culture around it. So I kind of have this sort of a story I want to lead with to give everyone some context, and then ask you about your background. Um, I don't know if you ever read any of Malcolm Gladwell's books, but in the book Outliers, he talks about what people do and what successful people do that sets them apart from the rest. And actually, one of the themes of the book that I took away was that a lot of it has to do not just with skill, but also circumstance, and having the right opportunity, but also taking advantage of the opportunity. And so one example he gave was of Joe Flom, who was a lawyer who grew up in the Great Depression era, grew up really poor, and he ended up taking, it's kind of a rags to riches story, if you will. He took a really small law firm that was struggling to do over $1 billion in revenue, which, by the way, pre printing press Fed era, that was a lot more than $1 billion now. So he did, needless to say, quite well. And in that he wanted to unpack part of what made him successful, and actually he talked about him being Jewish as one of the reasons for being successful for a few different reasons. One of them was that that his he talked about the immigrant mindset, essentially, like the hustler, work hard, do what you have to do to get by mindset. And he talked about how in Europe a lot of Jews were not able to actually own land, and so they were living in cities renting, and they had urban professions. So when they came over to the States, that benefited them a lot because they could have better jobs.
Right.
And so this guy, what did his parents do? his father he started like a clothing company out of his apartment. He was sewing shoulder patches for women, and I think he talked about how that's impacted his son and how his son was able to use those lessons to start his firm. So the question for you now is, how is your family culture? I don't know if your family came over from Europe or not, but how has that impacted your work ethic and your mindset around business and working hard?
So I think that it like comes from all sides and everywhere. There's the like cultural, like community, cumulative, like ongoing. We are Jews, and this is ingrained in us, right? Like we are people we were tortured, we escaped persecution. It's the whole like
Yeah.
they tortured us, then we survived. Let's eat, kind of thing, like over and over. So
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
like the concepts are ingrained as a culture, right? Like you hold on to all of our. It's all there. They're all on our shoulders. And it's this concept of appreciating freedom and opportunity. And if you are tortured physically, the power of the mind, right? That's in like the Holocaust mindset too, the power of the mind to escape in whatever circumstances you are and to have hope. Concepts like that are just so ingrained. Like they can take everything from us, but our ability to think, and that leads into why education is so important. So those same values are helpful from a leadership standpoint. So just to be raised with all of those concepts and then realize that over time, these also are concepts that through many business study success stories are very similar concepts to what it means to be a successful enduring business and to be a successful leader. So I think that's where it's so interesting. So culturally it happens. I think personally also, so I have great grandparents who came from Russia in the early 1900s, actually. So, and they started businesses.
There you go.
They all started businesses. So actually starting businesses to grow up in a family where it's the norm to take a risk, take a stand, do something about it, be in charge, right? Those all came naturally, and they came naturally in the culture because of those things. And then they came culturally just in the influence of what we know, right? And they say also for kids growing up, it's so common. We think that, if we tell our kids, do it this way and act this way, that they'll do it. They actually pay a lot more attention to what they see us do than anything we're ever saying, right? Like there's things that I've realized as an adult, I'm like, I am doing exactly what I just saw my parents doing, even though they didn't talk about it once. It's you do what you know, right?
Exactly.
They say like your kids become what you show them that you are, or what you show them that they are. So, I think that that's a really important concept. And also the importance of family and history. It's just such a big thing, right? Like that we need to be surviving. We're an underdog, right? The fight of the underdog. You need to be able to rebel and fight when things aren't okay. It's encouraged to challenge the status quo. How helpful are those when you're trying to start something and go against the odds, or if you have an idea, like you're taught to question. Without good questions, you can't have better results too. So like we're taught to question in everything we do already.
Right.
We're not taught to just like toe the line and say like, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, let's do it. We're taught to fight for injustice, embrace the stranger, take care of the other. Like all these things also are helpful to be not only a good person, but to be a good business person and to run a good company. So, I just think all of it, like in every story, in every religion, like in every like religious ritual, holiday, they're all in there.
Yeah. The stories have a lot of lessons to take from them. And it's something that I think about a lot, like how it's impacted, because you were talking about how maybe you find yourself doing things your parents did without saying it, but they just did it and you start doing it too.
Yeah.
I think it's because, I think over 70% of communication is nonverbal anyway. It's through body language and actions and that kind of thing. So it's kind of funny because when people ask me, like, I try and articulate what you said. You put it very well. It's hard for me to give specific examples because it's just something that I think you live, and it kind of blends together. But do you have any, like, what specific examples could you share maybe of any of the things that your family did growing up or that your parents did that taught you something that you think is beneficial for you as a leader in the company?
I remember different just phrases and things over time. I remember just the ability to start a business, right? Like not saying and being told like, if they can do it, you can do it, just concepts like that, or just that they valued family, right? Like we got together for holidays. So there were these routines. So, and these rituals like every year. So even if you thought you were, just like living your own life, not hanging out with the cousins, the family. Like you come together at these points and you are reminded you're part of something bigger and you're connected to these other people with like the same DNA who are part of the same experience, right?
Yeah.
And that we're in this together and we're connected. And also we're connected. And that's what I think is really interesting about family too, and the concept and how you look at it. And I absolutely totally believe in like found families, not by blood as well, but in circumstances when you just decide someone is your family and you'll take care of each other, which I also think is a Jewish value of benefiting, like we're going to take care and help other Jews. I also love that in our religion, it says you also will take care of other people and embrace the stranger. I think that's so important, especially these days with everything going on. It's important to say not just Jews, but you will help Jews. You'll take care of each other, in that like we can have a difference and we're still family, right? Like I'm not exactly the same as my cousin. We don't like all the same things, but we're part of the same family. So like respecting differences, we don't all have to be the same. And that's where creativity comes from too. You're encouraged to be creative, not told again, be like everyone else and march in line. Those are all things that are very like anti how I was raised and how I think a lot of Jewish kids are culturally raised, right? So, I think that just the 4 questions, thinking as a kid, like this is so annoying for the Passover story, sorry for reference, thinking as a kid, oh, this is so annoying. Why do we have to go over this? But the importance of repetition, right? That's even something as a leader, like tell your team something, you think you've said it, but unless you say it 7 times, you haven't said it, right? Like you think it's a communication thing. It's obvious to you, but not to them. Pay attention. We're telling the same stories over and over every year. Does that really, as a kid, that doesn't really make sense. You think I know this. Why do we tell it over and over again? Seeing different things in the same story each time, right? Asking different questions. So like right in the Passover story, you talk about 4 different kids asking different questions that relate to different types of people that all have their value that you embrace, that might from the surface look like one's better than the other, but it's not. They're all here for a reason, right? There's, a wise one that's evil, right? One that doesn't even know how to ask questions. And you're supposed to take care of and support all those types of people. I just think those concepts are really important about like inclusivity and hearing people and communication. So I think those are cool. Just seeing stuff like that. You also negotiate to get the afikomen back, right?
Oh, for sure. If you've ever been to Israel, you know about negotiation, like in the markets there for sure. For sure. Yes. It sounds like a lot. In Hebrew, mishpacha is family, right, which is something that you mentioned a lot over and over. So I think it comes down to, from what I was hearing, family values, caring about each other, taking care of each other, helping others is a big, strong theme that you think is important, and that's helped you out a lot.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay. So that actually is a good segue. I don't know if you did that on purpose or not, to my third question, which is about tzedakah and giving. Tzedakah is Hebrew for charity. I think it's when you go to synagogue, you give tzedakah basically, or you give tzedakah in a lot of different ways. A famous rabbi named Maimonides talked about how there's different levels of giving. The lowest level is like grudging, like, fine, I'll get the charity here, take some money. And there's all different levels. And the best way to give is to help someone in need to get on their feet again and to be self-sufficient. It's kind of like give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day, but teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime sort of principle. So applying that sort of top rung of giving and helping, not just giving and just saying here, like this is how you do it, but instead of just saying here, take it, how do you apply the top rung level with your employees or with your team when they're in need of helping them? Or I guess the word to say is enabling them to be successful.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I like that you brought up the teach a man to fish versus give a man a fish. Like you should be just inserting gefilte fish, in this for this context of this conversation. So I agree with that. I think it reminds me of a question you asked earlier too about personal responsibility. I think it's related. So personal responsibility, like enabling somebody to know that they can handle something, which is also self-sufficiency, which is what you're asking about. So, I mean, the power and gift to help someone understand that they can handle something, the confidence that comes with that, the power that comes with that, is one of those like unspoken things that creeps up slowly, but is so powerful and is such a different shift for someone, I think. Right. So in leadership in a company, giving your employees the tools to make the decisions for themselves so that they don't have to wait and hesitate, so they don't have to doubt themselves, right? It also contributes to their confidence. We all know like the power of this thing called confidence, this like unspoken thing that somehow some people just like get things to happen for them, right? And that's because they feel they're capable and they can do things and they believe in themselves. So giving that gift to your employees and then relating that in a business sense to, okay, then they can actually like do more without asking you every question.
Right.
They feel empowered, so they're better. They have more space to be creative because they know like which parameters they can run within. What I really like to do at work, because we deal with so many different situations, there's no way to train your team on every situation and exactly how to handle this specific one if you look at it that way. But if you teach them lessons and you teach them rules about how to think and what's right and wrong, they can actually make a decision 99.999%
Right.
of the time, right? So teaching them how to think. And I do tell the team too, like if you make decisions that are in line with the values that we've taught you, and then this relates to our other values too, if you are almost always going to be making the right decision. If you didn't, you had good intention and we will stand behind you, right? And it's okay. And it's okay to make a mistake. And it's okay as long as you learn from it. Try to not make the same mistake more than once. But if you do, we will learn from it. We'll move on, right? So I think that also, it's another helpful, like they're self-sufficient, they're empowered, not having a fear of making mistake too. So I mean, creating that for people, creating a space where they can do that and be that they'll do more, you'll do more. It's like, help me help you. So everyone benefits.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you talked a lot about giving them the tools to make them succeed. It almost sounds like you're helping them be more confident by helping them become more prepared. Because preparedness, I think, breeds confidence, right? Like they're prepared for every situation. And then it also sounds like you're giving them sort of a framework. You talked about how to think. I really like that because I remember when I was in calculus class, I told my teacher, I was like, Mr. Hilbold, when am I ever going to take the integral of a cone? And he's like, Jacob, you're not learning how to do math. You're learning how to think. And when you learn how to think, you can make those decisions in other situations, which is the most important thing. So teaching them, helping them, that kind of thing. It almost sounds like you give them like a framework or a code to kind of live by, if you will, and then let them mold. Because in conversations, it's always different, like you said. So maybe they kind of mold the conversation based on the framework that you give them, the values.
That's good language. You have some really key words there too, like framework, code of ethics, right? Like understanding. Those are, if you even think about the language you're using, you can find, a reference to that in culture, in biblical texts, and in like business practices, mission statements, any like sales proposal, they're in there.
Right.
Value, agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's cool that the language just comes up. So I know we're running out of time here. I think you got 3 minutes left. So quickly, I think this also ties in. I like how this conversation has kind of flowed. You're talking about teaching, and we were talking about teaching someone to fish or gefilte fish rather than to fish, just to give them a gefilte fish. So how do you? This kind of ties back in. So Judaism is all about learning and always constant study. If you're very, very religious, then you're in yeshiva, which is like a Jewish college, basically like 24/7 learning. That's like most ultra extreme, like very religious people. But even so, I think in the less religious sects of Judaism, learning and always being improving and studying is very important. So how do you always make sure that your team is learning? How do you always make sure that you're always learning so you can always be improving?
So I think, first of all, just encouraging that we learn new things. I think the one that is very important that we might not always give the right words to is actually like the education is really this growth in perspective. So it's understanding and communication and learning that there is this thing called perspective and learning that people are going to look at things a different way and they're going to look at it from their view. And if you can get your employees to master that, to master this concept that not everyone thinks the same way. Not everyone's coming at everything the same way, but understanding where they are coming from and how they are thinking, and then taking that and saying, okay, well, then we need to bridge this gap to understand each other. Oh, well, then I don't need to take all these things personally. This is how to approach somebody. So if you think about how that evolving lesson, there's different perspectives to look at things, can be so helpful in eliminating so many workplace conflicts, right? And like, you're not wasting time on this person is offended here, and or you're making sure that you're very sensitive world,
Yeah, definitely.
And so just understanding that, right? And education is what helps you understand that perspective exists. Right? It's education that makes you see there's two ways to look at this. There's something more I can learn. Like, I don't know everything. My brain just got bigger. And taking that as a value and a concept and knowing I don't know everything, right? This whole, like, if you know everything in the room, or you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room, right? Like, you need to be looking for more and accepting that there is potentially an unknown. And I think that leads to just sounder. If you even think about the language you're using, you can find, a reference to that in culture, in biblical texts, and in like business practices, mission statements, any like sales proposal, they're in there.
Right.
Value agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's cool that the language just comes up. So I know we're running out of time here. I think you got 3 minutes left. So quickly, I think this also ties in. I like how this conversation has kind of flowed. You're talking about teaching, and we were talking about teaching someone to fish or gefilte fish rather than to fish, just to give them a gefilte fish. So how do you? This kind of ties back in. So Judaism is all about learning and always constant study. If you're very, very religious, then you're in yeshiva, which is like a Jewish college, basically, like 24/7 learning. That's like most ultra extreme, like very religious people. But even so, I think in the less religious sects of Judaism, learning and always being improving and studying is very important. So how do you always make sure that your team is learning? How do you always make sure that you're always learning so you can always be improving?
So I think, first of all, just encouraging that we learn new things. I think the one that we don't is very important that we might not always give the right words to is actually like the education is really this growth in perspective. So it's understanding and communication and learning that there is this thing called perspective, and learning that people are going to look at things a different way and they're going to look at it from their view. And if you can get your employees to master that, to master this concept that not everyone thinks the same way, not everyone's coming at everything the same way, but understanding where they are coming from and how they are thinking, and then taking that and saying, okay, well, then we need to bridge this gap to understand each other. Oh, well, then I don't need to take all these things personally. This is how to approach somebody. So if you think about how that evolving lesson, there's different perspectives to look at things, can be so helpful in eliminating so many workplace conflicts, right? And like, you're not wasting time on this person is offended here, and or you're making sure that you're very sensitive world,
Yeah, definitely.
And so just understanding that, right? And education is what helps you understand